Hello accounts people, we're going to have a look at written tasks for level 4. Now it's hard to get feedback on written tasks unless you hand them into tutors. You could look at the AAT examiner's reports, that's fine, it gives some very useful feedback. So I'm actually going to go through the preparation and what you could be aiming for on a Osborne AM8 practice paper. It's a very good question, been around for years, looks very similar to lots of old practice papers, so everybody's fairly familiar with it. So first of all, as per examiner's reports, look at the mark allocation. This one we're going to aim for 12 marks, and you've got to make the examiners want to give you those marks. You've got to earn them. It's very possible on a lot of management accounting questions, more so than financial, to answer questions very quickly, very short, nothing wrong, nothing bad, but got nowhere near the mark. So the mark allocation indicates the depth that you're writing to. So this one starts off with a statement of profit or loss, although it's actually asking you to comment more about the table that you'll be calculating from it. However, you do need to quickly return to this to realise that Q, who you're writing about, are only 60% of the turnover, just under 60% of the volume of the competitor, the company that we're comparing them to. And there's a few other standout figures in terms of the overheads. Bigger, more established company, that's quite a lot of difference. Labour will analyse. But in absolute terms, they make a little bit more profit. Right, so I've actually kind of got the answers ready to paste rather than actually sitting there typing and making lots of typos. This is what you would have done, the bit that students like. Calculating some numbers to 2 decimal places, and you can see we've got a selling price difference, a variable cost, and the question is actually asking about this table more than the profit or loss, because it says analyse the performance of Q in comparison, making reference to the indicators calculated in part A. There's a little bit of work I'm going to do on something that isn't in here, but it's either based on this or in fact we've got to analyse the variable cost. It does need some variable, and how we end up with that contribution difference is quite important. And then the second part, so when I've been marking these, a lot of students seem to miss out this bottom bit. They forget to suggest the action and what they can do to improve their performance. Of course, they are making money, in fact they're more profitable than their competitor. It is just the fact that they're not spending on advertising, and they've only got 60% of the volume, so therefore they're vulnerable. Their sales could disappear very quickly. So let's have a go at what I've done basically, and see what you think of it. So again, I'm just copying and pasting rather than trying to type out, otherwise the video will take too long. Now bear in mind you've got 15 minutes. Can't do mimic that because I'm not under exam conditions. I've marked these, I've seen it before, I've marked them last year and the year before probably as well. So the end result is fill in what you can, do what you can, always use the extra time in this exam. It's a 3-hour long exam. Those last few minutes could make the difference between 89 and 90% or 69 and 70%. Any sample answers that anybody gives you, including this one, haven't been written by a student under exam conditions 90% of the way through a long 3-hour paper, because this is task 7 out of task 8. So this is what I've done. First of all, I've given a nice little opening paragraph. It explains what we've just been talking about. They're both profitable, but they've only got 60% of the volume. And at first glance, the variable cost difference suggests that growing will save them some money or make them more profitable. Different ways of saying that. And also because of the advertising, they could lose it. And then the other overheads aren't so obvious at first glance, but we could reduce those per unit if we grew in terms of volume, or they grew. So now we've done a nice little opening ambit. That doesn't necessarily earn a massive number of marks themselves, but it sets you up for a good answer. It's important on all other levels of RAAT written tasks as well. Alright, so now we're going to go through table 8 systematically, keep systematically top to bottom. So we talked about the selling price. 10p selling price is slightly higher. I suppose you could add the fact that this will increase profitability and contribution, but we've pretty much mentioned this a lot later on. So, however, the 10p difference is not the reason for the lower volume alone. 10p difference, unless it's an incredibly high price elasticity of demand, doesn't explain why they've only got 60% of SE's sales. Then the next row is about variable costs. So again, work out what you can on this. Always use time. So the variable costs reflect the lower volume. They might not be getting the maximum bulk discount or could work on an alternative supplier. The labour costs, however, are better for Q. So the two components of it. Now again, put the numbers in if you've got the time. I've done it in longhand, so you could always just put them in slightly shorter, straight off your calculator basically. I've just done the full workings out. Materials cost, just to put it into perspective, is 31 pence cheaper, more expensive, £1.60 instead of £1.29. The labour though is 18p cheaper when you work it out per unit. Watch the numbers carefully, because obviously the pound sign has got 3 zeros after it. The units doesn't. It's not in thousands, it's 3,000,000 and 5,050,000. Next row, no hesitation, no messing. You don't have time for that. So this shows in the contribution per unit. Again, try and word it carefully. Because of the materials cost, it's lower along, long, didn't need that word, I took that out earlier. Despite the selling price and labour efficiency. So selling price makes the contribution higher, labour efficiency does, but it's outweighed by the materials, which gives you something to work on and something to focus on, of course. So it's doing its job, the analysis. Next row is about production overheads. Working through the table. Low production overheads per unit, it's 51p per unit. That's quite staggering actually. So they're maximising their production capacity. On a different question, you might be asked to explain reasons for this. Who knows? In which case it would be possibly depreciation costs in overheads, or slightly more appropriate factory size, or it could be a bought property instead of rented. Who knows? There are lots of reasons why. They could have less management and less supervisory staff. Somehow or other their production overheads per unit are better. Maybe they're just the new people on the block, and they're growing and they're working out and they're catching this up. With the numbers that you've got, that does actually make sense. It's what you'd expect to see. Now, either as a separate paragraph or at the bottom of that paragraph, just obviously point out that you do understand that the lower production overheads increases their profitability. Now the bit that is arguable as to whether it needs to go into this answer, because this isn't really table A, so some examiners would ignore the fact that you're writing about it, although it does really help the overall conclusion. They've also got higher selling and distribution costs and admin costs per unit. Again, this points at volume. You would expect, if you are distributing more units, the cost per unit to go down. If you're dealing with more sales, more invoices, you expect the admin cost per unit to go down. There could also be different types of customers. Maybe more established, they've got customers who buy bigger volumes, therefore they're sending a lorry load full of more items, and that's the distribution cost. Or just the sales mechanism, how they actually distribute, sell, whether it's online or agents or whatever, or retailers. So there's something there. Again, lots of reasons for that. In a different day, you might be asked to suggest reasons why it's the case. Alright, so we've done that one. Next little bit then. Oh yeah, if if you've got the time, you could just put the numbers in. I'm just going to put the full calculations in. It's always good practice. Selling and distribution, I've added them together, works out at £4.22 per unit instead of £3.47 per unit. So it's quite a difference there. Again, volume would fix that. So again, that and the variable cost, the materials in particular, it's starting to really point us towards the volume issue. But in some ways, the biggest kind of structural difference, rather than pound difference, is the advertising per unit or as a total. It's reducing their profit, but it might be a long term. They might be speculating to accumulate. It might be why they've got more sales, and it could be a threat to Q. Q could lose their sales next year without being able to cut things like the fixed overheads and the admin costs and the selling and distribution and production. So any of the fixed overheads you can cut them in the long term, but you're not going to cut them next year. So we're getting to the bottom of the table, so we can now summarise effectively. And we're saying the end result is because of the higher production overheads and advertising that Q are more profitable in absolute terms, as well as net profit margin and the return on net assets. So absolutely they are slightly more, although one of the suggestions wouldn't take much for the profits to drop below. So that's it, making more cash profit as well as margin. And then the next bit that a few students seem to have forgotten about, and it's very easy, gone through the table, the suggestions, and in a way it's kind of not such a definite answer. It's a more judgmental answer. So this is my shot at it. You may disagree with it. There's some other perfectly good conclusions. So I'm suggesting they need to increase the volume, because this will get them better discounts and reduce the overheads per unit, and they're only going to do that from the figures we've got and the knowledge we have by increasing their advertising spend, and it will increase their sales as well as stop their competitor pinching their customers. My judgment is it will be more effective than matching the price alone, which would reduce all the profits or margins because you're not getting so much per unit. Turnover, it's £300,000 less, and that, of course, if you didn't increase any sales, would drop down into the profits and mean they're making less profit to less. So if it didn't work, that 10p, yes, it's a lost leader, that one. It will cause more problems. So again, the increase in advertising, just like we mentioned earlier with this, might be short term, it'll reduce the profits. So maybe next year they spend a lot more money on advertising and their profits come down, but the following year they've got more customers. Advertising and marketing work slightly different. Advertising tends to get a fairly quick response. Marketing budget increase generally will increase sales in the medium term. So it does actually mention that SE might actually be doing this at the moment. That might be what they're doing in the sums. So there we are. That's more than you can possibly write in 15 minutes. I've had lots of time to work on it, but it gives you something to aim for. Structure, earning the marks, following some structure. Yes, nice little opening paragraph. Doesn't have to be quite that long. Systematically going through everyone. Put the numbers in if you've got time. Come back to it, change the grammar, the terminology, make it look a little bit better, show more understanding and insight, and systematically, top to bottom, and don't forget the last little bits of any question, because that's going to take you up to the higher levels.